Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Maddie here. Now the new A4B ranked season kicks off tonight, or I guess tomorrow technically. Today we're going to cover the best decks to play to get a nice head start and to climb really quickly up into Master Ball. Again guys, the meta has shifted a lot over the past weeks and I'm actually really interested and really excited to go through all of these decks and really explain my reasoning as to why I think these are the best decks to be playing for ranked mode in this first week of this new ranked season. Yes, we did not get any new cards, but I think things have changed a little bit and you're going to want to be on top of things. You're going to want to be, at the forefront of the metagame so that you're playing the correct decks and you have the best chances of climbing very, very quickly. Before we do that, though, we do have some news. So, of course, the tournament series. That's right, the Pocket Meds, Pokemon Pocket Tournament. I have no name for this. It's just the community tournament. Our second one ever is this weekend. We'll have a video, and going into more detail about this probably, later this week. But for now, definitely go register. Registration is now open. It is going to be a fully best-of-3 tournament. It is going to be streamed and casted all weekend. There's $100 in the prize pool. You get a chance to be featured on Meta Monday. A really fun chance. Again, we're really trying to create, a consistent, really great tournament series competitive environment for all of you guys. Throughout this entire month, we're going to be doing it on a weekly basis, and this is definitely going to be a really great opportunity to come and compete. I would highly recommend it. Link to register will be down in the description below. Definitely go check it out. Now, like I said, the ranked season is launching tonight. So last night we went live for the actual set release where we opened a bunch of packs. We opened 3 shiny Giratina EXs, which was crazy. Big shout out to all of the people that joined in for the live stream last night. A ton of support. It was awesome. We're going to be going live again tonight for the release of ranked battles. We're going to try to get ahead of things. We're also going to open a whole bunch more packs, so stay tuned for that. If you want to tune in, in the middle of the night tonight for the release of the new ranked season, definitely go ahead and, and join in. It's going to be a lot of fun. I might be completely wrong about all of this, but I'm pretty sure the ranked season starts tomorrow, but I might be entirely wrong about that. Either way, these are the decks that I would play. So let's dive right into it, guys. Let's just get going. Okay, the first deck we're going to take a look at is Suicune and Greninja. Now, there's 2 main ways that people are playing Suicune and Greninja. That is, of course, with Giratina and Oricorio, or without Oricorio and just Giratina. Now, I've been a little bit... It's interesting. So if we think about Oricorio's positioning across really all of last season, I thought Oricorio for the most part wasn't a very good choice. Greninja was everywhere, and there really wasn't a lot of value to Oricorio in most decks, even lightning type decks. I just didn't love Oricorio. But, as we've really approached the end of the last season and as we go into this new season, I think there's a lot more opportunity for Oricorio. Specifically, it's a card, of course, that is immune to Giratina, to Darkrai EX. So in Giratina Darkrai, it's going to be fairly useful to kind of just stall, which is, of course, a very, very big deal. And of course, in the Suicune mirror matchup, it's, the only thing that you have to worry about is your opponent's Greninjas. So I like the 1 copy of Oricorio in Suicune Greninja right now. I actually feel like it dramatically makes your Giratina Darkrai matchup a lot better, and I think that's a really big deal because Suicune and Greninja has been kind of on the decline for the past week. Now, I do think that this will by far be the most played deck, whether it's with Oricorio or without, but if you wanted to choose which one you should be playing, I would play 1 copy of Oricorio in your Suicune Greninja deck, at least to start this ranked season. If there's one thing I know, is that a lot of people will be playing Giratina and Darkrai, and Oricorio is really good because they don't really have a way to quickly get around it, right? They have to just sort of ping you a little bit time after time, but we are playing 2 copies of Irida. We're playing water energies in this deck list, so even if we're not playing lightning energies in this deck, which we're not, we're just playing water energies, it doesn't really matter. Oricorio's not there to attack. It's really just there to kind of stall in the active spot while we, of course, just sort of set up our board state. Broken Space Bellow a couple times with Giratina. It really does make that Giratina Darkrai matchup a whole lot better, and that's going to be a really big deal, and has been a really big deal. This is an example of a deck that actually got first place at a recent large online tournament. The Oricorio stuff makes sense. Giratina Darkrai, super popular. At the beginning of this ranked season, a lot of people are going to be playing Giratina Darkrai, so I think Oricorio fits really well into this deck list, but I think it's just going to improve that matchup, and I think it's really worth it. A lot of people will be playing Suicune Greninja. That's another thing. So there's really 2 mainstream decks, I think, right now in the metagame. One of those being Suicune Greninja. The other one is being Giratina Darkrai. So I think traditionally Suicune has had kind of a tough matchup in a Giratina Darkrai. Really all last season, I would say it had a pretty significant losing matchup. By significant, I mean probably around 45%. Which is obviously not great in ranked battles if you're going to be playing a lot of Giratina Darkrai, which is why I think the Oricorio makes a lot of sense in this deck list. Everything else, though, pretty standard. One Cyrus, 1 Mars, 1 Giant Cape, and 1 Repel. I think we probably had to cut a Cyrus for the Oricorio here, but again, It's a bit more of a slower paced deck list. And again, even against Giratina Darkrai, just having Suicune in the active spot might be able to win you the game, right? It's not like playing no Oricorio and Suicune makes that matchup horrible. It's just Oricorio definitely makes it a lot better. So that would be my recommendation. If you wanted to play Suicune Greninja, which a lot of people will, my recommendation would be to play one copy of Oricorio in it to start this ranked season, just to counterplay a lot of those Giratina and Darkrai decks, because there's going to be a lot. We know that for sure, right? No matter what happens, at the beginning of ranked seasons, a lot of people are going to be playing Giratina Darkrai, and that is also one of my next recommendations. Yes, I think Giratina Darkrai is always a safe bet, especially for the players that are looking to get to Master Ball. It's a deck list that is fairly linear. There's actually a lot more complexity to Giratina and Darkrai in terms of the decision-making processes when you're playing the game. It's actually one of probably the more skillful decks in Pokemon Pocket, which I find to be very fun, but it's a very consistent deck, right? So it's very consistent. It doesn't really care that much about matchups. It does have some specific hard counters. The Greninja Oricorio deck, whether it's with Suicune or not, is a pretty significant hard counter. Executor, Decidueye are some things that have been seeing more play. We'll talk about them later in this video. Those grass-type decks seemingly do very well into Giratina Darkrai as well. Guzzlord can be another tricky matchup. So when you take a look at the overall sort of meta spread, right, the matchup spreads for Giratina Darkrai, I think there's a lot of decks in the metagame right now that technically have a winning matchup against it, but those win rates aren't necessarily anything that is super dramatic, right? So if you're really skilled or experienced at playing Giratina Darkrai, I guarantee you're going to be very close to 50% no matter what, right? You're not going to be very far below it. Win streaks are, of course, a thing, and in Ultra Ball, you can get to Master Ball with like a 40% win rate, right? So Giratina Darkrai, if this is your deck, if you like it, if you maybe pulled some shiny Giratina or Darkrai EXs from the new Deluxe Pack, listen, it's still going to be a strong deck list. It is sort of the #2 most played deck this season and last season. I think it'll continue to be so. One thing again to note, from a tournament perspective and from an overall meta viability perspective, Suicune and Giratina Darkrai have been on the decline. Now, they've been winning a lot of tournaments because just so many people are playing them. So from a pure mathematical, data perspective, it just makes sense that they would be winning a lot of tournaments because a lot of people are playing them. But when you take a look at their average win rate, you will see that the metagame has shifted basically completely around decks that are strong into either Suicune and Greninja or Giratina Darkrai, or in some cases, both. And I think that's a really interesting note. We'll cover it more for sure going into next week once we get a little bit more data from our tournament. But yeah, I do expect pretty quickly Giratina Darkrai and Suicune to fall off a little bit more than usual, at least in the tournament metagame. In ranked battles, again, the first few days of ranked battles, everybody's playing the most played decks, the most consistent decks, and it's all about getting to Master Ball, right? Once we kind of get a week or two into the season, or once you climb up to be, in a top 1,000 spot of the Master Ball rank, then, the metagame shifts a little bit, but we have to recommend Giratina Darkrai as, an early season option. It always is going to be really strong. Might not be as strong as previous seasons. We'll have to see. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but yeah, Giratina Darkrai is still a really, really strong option. Now, one of my most significant options right now that I would really recommend are going to be two different Silvally decks. So I would say in the metagame right now, there are 3 ways to play Silvally most prominently. That is going to be Lightning type Silvally, probably with Zeraora. I would say this is probably the best way to play it. No Oricorio here, but just a really fast-paced, aggressive deck. There's also Silvally Rampardos, which is, again, a really, really aggressive, high-damage deck, but it's a little bit less consistent. I would say a lot less consistent than playing Zeraora. And then there is Psychic type Silvally with Giratina. I don't really love Rampardos, quite frankly. I just think that the metagame is a little bit too fast for Rampardos. The fossils are a little bit sketchy with Greninja running around. There's a lot of hand disruption. This Silvally Zeraora deck is exceedingly well positioned against Suicune in particular, and that's going to be its upside. However, when you're playing just straight Silvally and you're playing 2 copies of Red and 2 copies of Rocky Helmet, you actually have a lot of potential to kind of take down really any deck in the game. I think that Silvally was probably the biggest sleeper. By the end of last season, I really felt like Silvally might have been just the best card in the entire metagame. It can kind of survive solo in the active spot for a couple of turns. Very easy to 2-hit KO basically anything with Rocky Helmet. You can kind of set up a second Silvally for a revenge KO with Rocky Helmet in red to get around things like even a Giant Cape Suicune or Giratina Darkrai. Zeraora is there again just as a really aggressive option in the early game, hitting for weakness 2 at KOing Suicune without Irida or Capes or anything. So it's a really really aggressive card that is really nice because it generates a free energy, but it's also a free pivot. So if you go second, you can still just attack with Silvally on turn 2. So again, I think the main core of these Silvally decks right now is, of course, Gladion and Silvally, but it really is the 2 Rocky Helmet and the 2 copies of Red. A very, very consistent deck list, a very fast-paced, aggressive deck that can deal way more damage than you might think. That is technically 140 damage when you combine the 100 damage from Brave Buddies plus Red plus Rocky Helmet. That's 140 potential damage in one turn, and that is a lot for a Pokemon that is as consistent as Silvally is. Just incredibly, incredibly strong. Again, we had to talk about Suicune, we had to talk about Giratina, but if I had to make a choice, which I will tonight, I probably will be playing Silvally to some degree. My early picks for decks that I just really feel strongly about are going to be both of the Silvally decks that we mentioned in this video. So I think there's really 2 different options. I think that you could play this deck, which is more specifically a counter meta deck against things like Suicune, but we also have Psychic type Silvally, which is going to be Silvally and Giratina EX. And this deck list, of course, doesn't play Zeraora. You can play 1 copy of any baby Pokemon. It doesn't matter because we're playing Psychic Energies in this deck list. This deck is really all about not really caring that much about your matchups. Like, what's really interesting, and I played this deck a ton throughout basically the last 2 weeks of the season. It was by far my #1 choice for those last 2 weeks last season. And I feel like the big reason why I really liked this deck was because it didn't have, like, it wasn't a deck that was determined on a specific matchup, right? So it wasn't a counter meta deck in the metagame. What it was just an inherently really strong deck that had very good chances to beat any deck that we went up against. I would say really the only Pokemon, the really only strategy that hard counters Silvally like this would probably be Magnezone, but Magnezone's really nowhere to be seen. So Silvally is just a really uniquely well-positioned deck right now. The advantage of playing Giratina in a deck list like this as opposed to Zeraora is, of course, the potential to be able to hit for like even more damage, right? So Giratina plus Red is 150 with Rocky Helmet. They're getting into like the 170 range. And we're also playing Psychic Energies, which means that leading Giratina really isn't that bad because we can double up and then attack turn 3 with Giratina, which oftentimes is just enough to win the game. And theoretically speaking, you can go Silvally into Giratina, which is going to be, of course, an advantage that the other Silvally decks really just don't have. So I really like this deck. It was kind of my #1 choice for ranked battles last season after, of course, my Raikou stint. We'll get into the electric type decks later in this video because electric type is probably the most interesting type in the game. There's really a couple dynamics in this season at this point that I think will carry over into this new season. That is, of course, the decks at the top of the metagame being Darkrai and Suicune. There's the counter meta lightning decks, but then there's, of course, all of these grass decks that have emerged that are kind of skewing the data a little bit. They're kind of skewing all of the matchup spreads and the viability of a lot of different decks this season. So that's going to be one of the main things to talk about today. The cool thing, again, about this deck list is that I don't consider it to be in the counter meta. Even though this deck really doesn't see any play in terms of like tournament play, it's just not a popular deck list, I actually put it at the top of like kind of the meta driving deck lists in the sense that nobody's counterplaying this deck because not enough people are playing it. And this deck list isn't played to counterplay any other deck, right? We can beat Suicune easily. We can beat Giratina Darkrai easily. We can beat the grass decks. We can beat the lightning type decks. We can beat virtually anything in the entire game with this deck list. I wouldn't say that any of the matchups are like super like free, but I wouldn't say that any of the matchups are horrible, right? So it's one of those really uniquely positioned decks that you always have the opportunity to win no matter what you're going up against. And it's a very, very consistent deck. One of my favorites, honestly. This might be still my #1 pick going into next season. We'll have to see. The Silvally Zeraora deck is definitely a close second, I would say. But Silvally in particular is something that I have my eye on. And not even this season. I think as we get into the B1 season with Mega Pokemon, I think Silvally has a lot of potential, honestly, even as a pairing for Mega Pokemon or counterplay to a lot of Mega Pokemon strategies. I'm really curious to see how that goes. But anyway, shout out to Silvally, and just an incredible deck. It really is. Again, the Pichu can be played with anything, or you can replace Pichu with any of the other baby Pokemon like Mantike, like Magby. This deck plays Psychic Energy, so, I mean, it doesn't really matter. This deck is playing Pichu, but, you know, again, it can be whatever. Psychic Energies for this deck list. By the way, I forgot to mention, but the energy types for all of the decks that we mentioned in this video, and really any of our videos, we put in the timestamps down in the description below. It just saves me some time from like editing the videos and putting the energy symbols on the screens. I know people like complain or ask about that. I just put them in the timestamps. People use the timestamps anyway, so that's where the energy types are for all of the deck lists. But yes, Silvally, if you're not playing Giratina Darkrai or Suicune, honestly, my top recommendation would probably be to play some of these Silvally decks to either degree. Now, again, there's going to be a lot of decks that we don't talk about in this video, but that doesn't mean they're not good. Of course, we're covering, I think, 9 decks in today's video, but there's probably 15 to 20 decks that you could very easily climb to Master Ball with. So keep that in mind. These are just my top choices. Next up is going to be really what I consider the one true like pure lightning type deck right now that I think deserves some mention, right? So last season, it was a really interesting time for lightning because there were so many different Pokemon, so many different combinations. Nobody really knew what the best version was. I myself played Raikou and Tapu Koko and Pikachu in Zeraora for really the first 2 weeks of last season, and it operated exceptionally well, but what ended up happening after the first 2 weeks of last season was that things like Guzzlord, like Giratina Darkrai became more and more popular, and those matchups aren't, of course, very kind to the Lightning type. So the Lightning type decks are exceptionally strong into Suicune, but again, they do struggle sometimes with those Dark type decks like Guzzlord, like Giratina Darkrai, just because we're not hitting for weakness and they have a lot of HP and they want to kill all our Pokemon, right? So those matchups never felt very good, and those decks became exceedingly popular. This was a big reason why I swapped to Silvally to kind of find a nice middle ground for the second half of last season, but this deck list here really emerged. This Pikachu Toolbox deck with Oricorio actually did emerge as we kind of went into that last week of last season as probably the best lightning type option, and I think it kind of makes sense because it has everything going for it. We have fast-paced lightning type cards like Circle Circuit Pikachu, like Zeraora, and that's going to be really strong into Suicune, and then the Thunderbolt Pikachu is really this card that it's our only option as far as the lightning type stuff goes for our ability to take one-hit KOs, right? There's not many lightning type Pokemon that deal a lot of damage, and this is, you know, really our only option. Pikachu has only 120 HP, and it does discard all of the energies, but this is a game-ending card, right? That we're going to end the game with Thunderbolt. 150 is really a big deal. It's enough to KO most Pokemon in the game, but what I really like about this deck is that it encompasses kind of everything because we're also playing 2 copies of Oricorio, which again, like I said, for the first half of last season, I wasn't a big fan of Oricorio just because I don't think it was providing a lot of value, but now as we kind of go into this new stage of the metagame, I think Oricorio has provided a lot more value with Giratina Darkrai's everywhere, with Guzzlords everywhere, even some of those grass type decks that are, you know, mostly just playing EX Pokemon. Oricorio is definitely going to be valuable, and it's not a horrible card for sure into Suicune. It just doesn't feel great with Greninja. So keep that in mind as well. I just think Oricorio has gotten a lot better. So we mentioned 1 copy of Oricorio in the Suicune Greninja deck, mainly for that Giratina Darkrai matchup. But 2 copies of Oricorio is going to make a lot of things a lot better, particularly some of those like Turbo Arceus Darkrai decks, Giratina Darkrai. There's just a couple of decks that are prominent in the format right now that just can't really get around to Oricorio. So even if we're not dealing a ton of damage and we don't have really any healing in this deck list, what we can do, of course, is just use it to stall out, to set up Pikachu EX to take a big KO, right? So I like this deck. It kind of encompasses a little bit of everything. Again, Oricorio is a unique example. It wasn't something I was playing in my Lightning decks early last season, but towards the end of the season, I think it ended up being really strong. Again, people always tell me that the metagame's not changing, that nothing's going to change, everything's the same, and that it's boring, but to be fair, that's just not the case. The people that say that only look at like, oh, you know, people are still playing Suicune, people are still playing Giratina Darkrai, and they think the meta isn't changing. It's just not the reality of it, right? You have to look, you know, beyond the 2 decks that are the most common decks. Yeah, of course, people are still playing Suicune Greninja. Of course, people still are playing Giratina Darkrai, but there's, you know, a whole 60-70% of the meta share and of the metagame below that that is evolving and expanding. And I think that what we're probably going to see as time goes on is that things like Giratina Darkrai and Suicune are not nearly going to be as viable as they are or were at the beginning of last season. There's just so much counterplay right now. I'm really excited to see what the results are of the tournament. I wouldn't be surprised if either of those decks won just because of how many people will play those decks, but their overall win rates are probably going to be fairly low, I would assume. So keep that in mind. This, to me, is probably your #1 choice for an actual pure Lightning type deck right now. And it's cool because it does incorporate one of the new Pikachus and one of the old Pikachu, which also get a reprint, right? Every card in this deck, basically, other than Guzma and Pichu, was reprinted, right, in the deluxe pack. So I think that's a really big deal. Really cool. I did pull one of the new, what is it, the 2-star rarity Pikachus from the deluxe pack. It's a really cool card. So I might be playing a deck list like this as well. A great deck. It really is a strong deck. I have to recommend it as far as lightning type decks go, but I think that overall the lightning type is becoming less and less impactful in the metagame just because so much of it is just non-Suicune, and anything that's really non-Suicune right now in the metagame seemingly strong against lightning, and it kind of feels a little bit bad, so it is what it is. But next up, guys, is going to be the sub plug. That's right. This is going to be a little bit of a slower month, I presume, from the content perspective, but anybody that subscribes to the channel that, of course, supports me and supports the content, I greatly, greatly appreciate it. Again, almost 55% of you guys that have been watching my content this month are not subscribed to the channel, so if this is your first time here, or if you have watched some of my videos in the past, I definitely recommend hitting that subscribe button. It's free, it supports me, and I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. All right. Moving on. We're going to get into some of the grass type stuff. So this was probably what I would say the biggest development of the second half of the season last season, and I think it'll carry over into this new season, and that is going to be these grass type decks. It started off as Decidueye. Executor did come in a little bit later as something that was specifically a bit better into Giratina, Darkrai, and Guzzlord, but I would say still the most prominent grass type inclusion to the metagame is Decidueye. This is a very unique deck list. I will say that some Decidueye decks are playing 1 or 2 copies of Cleffa. This is just an example of a deck that did well recently at a tournament, so this deck list is not playing Cleffa, but you can theoretically swap one of the cards in the deck for Cleffa, but I think maybe just one Pokecom is probably better, just because Greninjas are everywhere, right? And Cleffa is a little bit of a, it's just a little bit of a what's the term? A liability, right? Just with the Greninjas, right? It's got such a low HP, like it's kind of a free prize card when you're playing against Suicune. But the cool thing about Decidueye and Executor, although I don't believe we're mentioning Executor in this video, is that they are these really, really strong grass type Pokemon that can kind of sit alone in the active spot and soak up a bunch of damage and deal a bunch of damage as well. Decidueye kind of fits that bill better than any other. It is a rare candy deck list, but this is sort of a new archetype of deck list that I think we never really had before, and is now specifically quite strong in a metagame where Suicune is very popular, and then if you're not playing against Suicune, you're probably playing against like a dark type deck that is weak to grass, right? So Decidueye very uniquely well positioned, and because we have access to Lily, Erica's, and Leaf Cape, then Decidueye goes to 200 HP and you can heal every turn for a bunch of HP. It just becomes a really difficult card to deal with, and the nice thing about Decidueye is that we don't actually have to play things like Sabrina or Cyrus because we have Pierce the Pain and we're able to deal 100 damage to a bench Pokemon. So that's a really big deal. Decidueye is going to have a good matchup into Suicune, into Guzzlord, probably decent into Giratina Darkrai, although it might not be, perfect. Yeah, also a deck that's probably going to do pretty good into those lightning type decks, right? Just because, it's healing for so much. The grass type decks that have entered the metagame recently also do strong into the lightning type anti-meta decks. So what we're really seeing is that a lot of those counter meta picks that were lightning type before are kind of being taken up by a lot of these grass type decks, just because all of the dark type stuff has become exceedingly more popular, and grass is a really nice middle ground, right? So we're hitting for weakness on all of the dark type decks, but we're also just inherently strong into the Suicune matchup just because of the nature of our deck list and how we only have one Pokemon in the active spot most of the time, right? So it's a very unique example. I really, really like Decidueye. It feels a bit better for sure to go second than it does to go first, right? Turn 2 Decidueye off that rare candy is absolutely insane. But again, it's a deck list that inherently is going to have some inconsistency to it just because we only have one option, right? So you're guaranteed to lead Rowlet, but there's no guarantee that you're going to draw your evolution Pokemon, and you definitely need them in order to do anything for this deck. So it's really like a one and done type deal. If you don't draw your Pokemon, you just don't draw your Pokemon, and that can be a bit of a struggle. But yeah, Decidueye is a real player into the metagame. It's actually performed very, very well over the last few weeks, and we've talked about it a number of times, but I think it's something I still have to recommend for this first season of Ranked, mostly just because, you gotta understand, like, at the beginning of the Ranked seasons, things are very much skewed towards the top of the metagame just because people are playing what they are confident in or what they think is the best, and they're not being as creative, right? So a lot of Giratina Darkrai, a lot of course, Suicune, and Decidueye does pretty well into those matchups, I would say. The non-EX Decidueye, unfortunately, was not reprinted. Neither was Skill Dive. We talked about that in yesterday's video. Those cards were not reprinted in the deluxe mini set for whatever the reason. But that Decidueye is of course going to be really good for Oricorio. That's really what it's all about. Being able to one-hit KO an Oricorio, whether it's on the bench or the active spot, is actually kind of crazy. 130 HP again with Leaf Cape brings you up to 160. Still a very, very impressive Pokemon, a difficult Pokemon to deal with, quite honestly. So yeah, it's a strong deck. I think it'll stick around the season unless something really changes about the top of the metagame. I still expect Decidueye to be a significant player. So yeah, there you go. I would recommend it. Still, I'd still recommend it. You know what I also still recommend is Flareon. I think Flareon really is kind of that unsung hero. I would call it like really the only real like turbo deck in the format, fire-type decks have always been very interesting because they're very linear and they're very much not complex in terms of their play style, but they're very volatile. And Flareon fits that bill, right? Before Flareon, we had Charizard. Flareon is kind of the new age Charizard, right? There's just no reason to play Rare Candy and play Stoke Charizard when we can just play Flareon, which has the absolutely insane combustibility, but has access to things like EV Bag and Red and Magby, right? So it's a stage 1 Pokemon, and we can also play the Genetic Apex Flareon, which, you know, rest in peace, was also not reprinted in the deluxe set, but either way, that's there for Oricorio as well. Flareon is a deck that, of course, can just absolutely body you on turn 2. Sometimes it doesn't, but sometimes it does, and when it does, the game's over. It's just a deck list like that. I always have to recommend Flareon. It always is a deck list that just pops up in tournaments, in high up in the standings, just because of its potential. It's never a deck where like a ton of people play it. I don't know whether that's from a popularity perspective or maybe people just don't understand Flareon. What's actually really funny, especially in like a tournament perspective, you know, if enough people played Flareon, it would win every tournament, just because inevitably someone's going to get lucky. It kind of reminds me of, you know, the Crimson Storm, like Genetic Apex Charizard from back in the day. Back in the original Genetic, just a throwback, by the way, back in the original A1 format, everyone was playing Pikachu and everyone was playing Mewtwo, but then eventually people realized that if they just played Charizard, then they had at least the opportunity to never lose a game, right? Because of just how strong the deck was on the high end. Flareon kind of fits that bill. It really is a deck list that nobody can do anything about if it gets the perfect start, right? And if enough people play Flareon, no one else is going to win the games, just because if one Flareon player gets really lucky, you can't win. You just can't. So it's one of those types of decks. I call it a high roll deck, but it's a mix between like a high roll and a turbo deck, which is why it's really strong. Consistently, I think all last season had about a 51 to 52% win rate. Gonna be also still a really strong choice. Even maybe perhaps a better choice if a lot of people are playing those grass type decks, right? Like Decidueye and Executor. You know, Flareon's going to appreciate those matchups. It really will. I don't think we can actually 1-hit KO a Decidueye with Giant Cape, which is a little bit unfortunate, right? Or with Leaf Cape, because they go to 200. Flareon does 150, plus Red, plus double EV Bag is 190, I think is the most we can hit. So yeah, technically speaking, we can't 1-hit KO Decidueye EX with Leaf Cape, but we can get pretty darn close, and we're definitely 2-hit KOing. So a very explosive deck is how I would explain Flareon. But it's a deck that, again, just doesn't really care what's going on in the metagame, right? It's just going to win about 50% of the games, and there's really nothing that you or your opponent can do to change that, which makes it actually a pretty strong deck in ranked battles. It's got to be on the list. Again, it's a weird deck, right? We talk about it from time to time. I have to keep including it just because maybe people are interested in playing it. It's not a deck list where the playstyle I'm that interested in playing, but it's something that has to be relevant, right? It's always going to be a factor, which is why we're talking about it in today's video. You know what I mean? Anyway, there's Flareon, definitely something I have to recommend. You know, and let's talk about Guzzlord as well, because Guzzlord to me is one of the more interesting decks that I think still people sleep on. There was definitely a time going into maybe the second week of last season, it won our first Pocket Mads tournament. It really was the deck that popped up and said, listen, I can beat Suicune and I can beat Giratina Darkrai, and I beat the Lightning counter meta deck. So like, what are you going to do about it, right? Now, again, the grass type decks are becoming more and more common, which definitely makes things feel a little bit worse for Guzzlord, but you have to keep in mind, it has a strong matchup into Giratina Darkrai, and it has a strong matchup into Suicune, especially if we flip a couple heads, right? We are playing Will. Will was not reprinted in the deluxe set, neither was Repel, but basically everything else was reprinted. Pokemon Center Lady as well, not reprinted, so keep that in mind. But yeah, Guzzlord's still a strong option. I mean, it's Guzzlord. It kind of feels similar in terms of its like meta positioning to like Flareon, because sometimes it just doesn't care. You know, Guzzlord doesn't really care what goes on, what it's going up against. It's just like, hey, you know, let's flip some coins. Let's see how it goes. You know what I mean? I mean, the nature of a coin flip is 50-50, right? I swear to you, if you play 10,000 games of Guzzlord, you might win exactly 50%, just the nature of RNG and coin flip. So if you like seeing that coin flip up and down a bunch of times, if you like this strategy of a deck, if you like this type of deck, you know, it's a fairly viable option. It's still good. In fact, like, you know, especially in tournaments, like I would say that Guzzlord has as good of a chance of winning any tournament as any. One thing that we have seen, though, again, most recently, just with all of the grass type decks popping up over the last week, is that Guzzlord players are really, I think, swapping to other deck lists. And Giratina Darkrai has really kind of consumed or eaten up a lot of the meta share that Guzzlord had into that second week. So it's definitely not at like one of the top 3 most played decks, but I still think it's a really strong deck. Again, it's going to struggle against Executor. It's going to struggle against Decidueye, but other than that, I think it does fairly well, at least into the top 2 decks of the metagame. You know, so we had to talk about Guzzlord. we couldn't make this video without mentioning it. Now, I personally don't want to play Guzzlord as my deck to climb ranked, but again, you know, to each their own, right? If you love it, if this is your deck, then play it, you know, because it is definitely still a good option. Not something that I can really do myself for hundreds of games. I just can't do it. But anyway, Guzzlord's still a strong deck. Next up, though, guys, to finish the video is going to be our weekly wild card. This is the deck list that we really reserve for something that, you know, is kind of new to the format, something that's not necessarily proven, but something that, you know, has done well recently and I think has a lot of potential. So we actually talked about this briefly in yesterday's video. I made a community post about it, and that is going to be Gyarados and Suicune. So the interesting thing about Suicune and Gyarados is that this deck list is actually cracked. This deck is insane. It's exceedingly strong. The reason why I have been talking about this deck is because at a 200-player tournament last week, it won. It got first place, and it ended up beating 5 out of 5 matchups into Giratina Darkrai, as well as beating a handful of other meta decks. It's just a really, really strong deck. And it's obviously not very proven. Not many people have been playing this strategy, but I think there's a lot of merit to it. So 2 Suicune, 2 Mantike, 2 Palkia, 2 Gyarados, and 1 Manaphy. The reason why we're playing so many Pokemon in the deck is because of that wild swing attack from Gyarados. Now, keep in mind, this Gyarados from, I believe, A4, or maybe Secluded Springs, I don't even know how new it is a very, very strong Pokemon, being able to deal 140 damage, with the caveat that we have to discard all of our benched water Pokemon, and for every Pokemon we discard, we'll deal 40 more damage, right? Plus 20 is 140 at the maximum. That is enough to KO most Pokemon in the game, like just inherently, for only 2 energies. Suicune is a main draw engine, so we can actually draw all of these Pokemon very, very quickly. Magikarp with Leap Out allows you, even if you lead Magikarp, to you know, attack, go into Suicune, and then you still get that extra draw for the turn, as well as getting the energy on Magikarp. One thing I will say about this deck list, and in my limited testing with it, is that it is not very apparent how you should be playing this deck. It might be very confusing. I will tell you that I believe that for the most part, the main advantage to a deck list like this, and you'll notice we're playing 2 copies of Leaf, is because a lot of times we're not actually attaching or really fully committing to the Pokemon that's in the active spot. Like if we lead off with Suicune, we might just sort of attach to like our bench Gyaradoses, and same with Palkia. You can afford to attach 1 energy to Palkia just to kind of deal a little bit of chip damage with Slash. I think that's definitely a big reason why it's there. But the predominant reason for those Pokemon is that they have a lot of HP, so they can sit in the active spot, tank hits for like 1 or 2 or 3 turns, and then we can play Leaf, retreat, go into Gyarados, and then actually, you know, take the KO or deal a bunch of damage while discarding the Pokemon that have damage onto them. So it's actually a really unique way to effectively full heal your Pokemon, or just kind of remove all of your previously damaged Pokemon off the board, which is really strong. So if you're not one at KOing any of these Pokemon, that sort of gameplay perspective is actually really unique, but exceedingly strong, just because you might have attacked Suicune 2 or 3 times, and then now it's just gone and you never got the opportunity to KO it, right? So Gyarados is actually really strong in that vein. We're playing Mantike and we're playing Manaphy. Some people might be curious why we're playing Manaphy. I think we just want like more Pokemon, just, you know, to have the option for Wild Swing, but Manaphy going second is actually broken. I think people just forgot how strong this card was, but going second, leading Manaphy, you can literally attach and then generate 2 more energy, so that's 3 energies in 1 turn. Manaphy is really, really strong going second. It's not a bad leadoff option, and then of course we have Mantike for going first or second, honestly. So this deck list has so many different pockets, so many different lines to it. I would say it's definitely the least simple deck probably in this video to play and to pilot, but for those of you that are interested in learning this deck list, and anybody that maybe has any further, I guess, information or knowledge about you know, how they should be playing this deck, or any recommendations on what they should do if you're playing this deck list, comment down below. I would love to hear your guys' opinions about it, but I really feel quite strongly about this deck list. Again, you have to keep in mind lightning type decks are becoming less and less common, so a deck list like this can stand up to Giratina Darkrai. It's basically like, hey, I want to play Suicune, I want to play water, but I don't want to have a losing Giratina Darkrai matchup. Here you go. This is sort of your example here. And I think it's something that a lot of people have been waiting for quite some time, which is, you know, a Suicune deck that is alternate to the Greninja strategy, right? I think that there just wasn't a lot of opportunity or I guess, you know, expression for creativity with Suicune, because so many people started to play it with Greninja from the very beginning. I promoted that deck because, again, it is broken, right? Greninja is a crazy card. But for anybody that wanted to play water decks, that wanted to play Suicune, but not play Greninja, I think this might be one of the best options. Now, there's definitely room for some growth here. I'm not going to sit here and say that this deck list is final or optimal. I'm sure there's definitely some stuff that can change here. This is just the example of that one player. I think it was like Mr. Diamond, or I forget his name, honestly, but big shout out to him, who had an incredible run and got first place at a tournament with this deck, a very creative deck. a very fun deck and a very strong deck as well. And I think we're going to see stuff like this pop up. You know, there's just so many strong cards in the game that it just takes time. You know, the people that think the metagame's not going to change, quite frankly, I think you're wrong. I think we're going to see new decks all month long, and I think that certain decks are going to rise and certain decks are going to fall, and we're going to cover it here on the channel. We'll just have to wait and see what happens at the tournament series, quite honestly, which I'm actually excited about, because now we have hopefully a really good, consistent set of data for us to move the metagame forward and kind of cover all of the results and cover the data. I'm actually really excited about this season. But anyway, this is the wild card for the week. Comment down below what you guys think of these decks, and any information that you might have, any tips or tricks if you've piloted this deck or tested it yourself. I'd be very curious to know. Yeah, there we go, guys. There is the video. My best decks for this new ranked season to start off. Comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. Again, don't forget to like and subscribe. I appreciate the subscriptions, but also don't forget to register and play for the Pocket Mads tournament this weekend. It's going to be really, really fun. Again, noontime Eastern time on what is it, on Saturday. So it's a 2-day event. Day 1 will be Saturday, and then anybody that makes day 2, it will also start on Sunday at noon. But yeah. There it is. Go register. Link to register down in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe, guys. Peace out. Have a good one. We'll see you guys later. And yeah. Bye.